What would you do if the people who should protect you decided you were worth no more than a debt to be erased? The Wyoming Territory winter of 1867 carried a cold that did not just freeze the land, it froze hearts too. Snow lay heavy over the trails, settling on pine branches like silent warnings from nature itself. And inside the tall Thornton homestead, a woman sat alone in a room that did not feel like hers anymore. Sarah Thornton, young widow and quiet soul, kept her hands folded in her lap as the dim morning light touched her pale face. The fire in her small hearth had died hours ago, and no servant bothered to relight it. Cold had settled into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the cold that had settled in her life. Since the death of her husband Jacob, nothing in the homestead felt warm. His boots still stood by the door, a layer of dust softening their shape. His rifle hung untouched above the mantel. His laugh, once the brightest sound in the house, had been replaced by whispered judgment and heavy silence. And all of it came back to one thing. She had not given Jacob an heir. To his mother, Martha Thornton, that single fact erased everything else about Sarah. Every act of kindness, every stitch she sewed, every sacrifice she made, none of it mattered. Martha saw only an empty womb, and in that emptiness, she saw failure. Sarah lowered her gaze and breathed in slow. She had learned to hide her pain behind a calm face. She had learned to walk with quiet dignity, even as the servants avoided her and the neighbors whispered. But nothing prepared her for the moment when Martha called her into the study that morning. Martha's voice was crisp as frost. "Sit." Sarah obeyed. Her black morning dress rustled softly as she took the chair across from her mother-in-law. Snowlight filtered through the tall windows, casting a pale glow over the wooden desk where a stack of papers lay. Martha tapped one of them with a thin, cold finger. "It's done," she said. "You'll leave this homestead in 5 days." Sarah blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Leave? You've been sold." The words hit her harder than any storm wind. She felt the floor tilt beneath her boots. "Sold?" Martha repeated calmly, as if she were ordering more firewood. "Mr. Harlow, a trader passing through, agreed to take you as repayment toward the family's outstanding supplies. You'll join his wagon train and relieve this house of your burden." Sarah's throat tightened. She stared at the ink on the contract, at Martha's neat signature, and at the small blot beside it, still fresh. "Like I'm property," Sarah whispered. "You made yourself that," Martha answered. "A useless wife who failed to give Jacob an heir has no place here." The cruelty in those words felt like a lash across Sarah's chest. "Jacob died before we could know if children were possible," Sarah managed. "How can you blame me for what none of us could control?" Martha stood, tall and rigid. "I blame facts. A barren woman brings nothing to a family, nothing but disgrace." Silence swallowed the room, heavy, suffocating silence. Sarah rose slowly. She refused to cry in front of the woman who wanted so desperately to break her. "If I am so disgraceful to you," she said quietly, "then this house has already lost more than you know." Martha's lips pressed thin. "Get out, Sarah." So Sarah did. She walked down the corridor with her spine straight and her steps measured, even though inside her chest everything shook. She reached her small room, closed the door gently, and let her breath collapse from her lungs. Only then did she cry, silent tears that fell like snowflakes melting on cold ground. For the next days she prepared in silence. No one helped her pack. No one asked where she would go. She wore the dress Martha gave her for one final social event the settlement was hosting. "A night of dignity before you're gone," Martha had said. But dignity was something Sarah carried herself. On the night of the winter social, a wagon dropped her at the trading post hall. Snow fell softly across the rooftops, lantern glow warming the windows. Inside, music floated, laughter echoed, and every scent of cider and pine needles felt like a world she no longer belonged to. She stepped inside alone. Immediately, whispers cracked like brittle branches. "That's her? The widow who gave no heirs? She's being sent away, they say." No wonder. A Thornton woman must be useful. Sarah did not bow her head. She walked as her mother taught her, with grace even in the face of humiliation. She reached the far side of the hall and stood quietly near a wooden pillar, and that was when she felt it. A gaze. Steady. Unwavering. Cutting through every whisper around her. She looked toward the staircase. Flint Bridger stood there. The mountain man every woman in the territory admired, whispered about, dreamed of. Rugged, respected, feared. A man who lived more in the wild than among people. A man who did not bow to anyone. And he was watching her, not with judgment, with interest. He descended the stairs without looking away. Each step drew eyes, quieted gossip, shifted the air itself. When he reached her, Sarah felt the entire hall hold its breath. "Mrs. Thornton," he said in a deep, quiet voice, "a night like this should begin with a dance." Her heart stumbled. "I wasn't invited to take part in the dances," she whispered. "I don't want to disturb the dignity of the hall." Flint's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with understanding. "The only thing disturbing dignity," he said, "is this hall refusing to see your worth." He extended his hand. All eyes watched. Sarah lifted her hand and placed it in his. At that moment, the world changed, and it was only the beginning. The hall had never fallen so silent. As Flint Bridger led Sarah into the center of the room, every whisper turned into a held breath. The musicians hesitated for a heartbeat, startled by the surprise of it all. Then the bow touched the fiddle, and the first notes of a soft frontier waltz filled the air. Sarah moved carefully, her hand resting lightly in Flint's. She felt every stare on her back, every judgment waiting to strike. But Flint's presence was a shield, steady, unshaken, like the mountains he called home. "You don't seem afraid," he said quietly as they stepped in rhythm. "I learned that fear feeds those who wish to see you bend," she answered. Something in his eyes softened. Their dance didn't have the glow of joy or celebration. It was a dance of two people who carried scars they never asked for. Yet the way they moved, slowly, surely, made the hall feel different. For a few seconds, no rumor or insult held any power. When the music ended, Sarah lowered in a small curtsy. Flint bowed his head before her, a gesture so rare that gasps rippled across the hall. Without another word, he led her back toward the edge of the room. But instead of leaving her there quietly, he paused, his voice low but clear enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Thank you," he said, "for walking through a room that doesn't deserve you." Sarah's breath caught. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving behind a stunned room and a woman whose world had shifted in one heartbeat. Whispers exploded instantly. Flint Bridger chose her? There must be something between them. A barren widow and the most respected mountain man? Impossible. But it wasn't impossible, because the next morning news ran through the settlement like a wildfire no one could smother. Flint Bridger declared his intention to court Sarah Thornton. Men frowned, women froze. Elders shook their heads, confused. But no one felt the shock more violently than Martha Thornton. When the announcement reached her, she threw her tin cup into the fire so hard the servants ran. "I sold her to be rid of her," she hissed. "I won't let her rise above me." But the settlement didn't wait for Martha's opinion. They judged with their own harsh eyes. By mid-morning, Sarah received more visitors than she had in months. Mrs. Catherine Reed arrived first, offering a polite smile that hid sharp curiosity. Then came the widow Harrison, clutching her shawl dramatically. Then, two merchant wives who pretended to show concern but only wanted gossip. "My dear," Catherine said sweetly, "how did you secure the attention of such a man?" Sarah held her gaze, calm and unwavering. "Maybe he values what cannot be bought." The women exchanged stiff smiles before leaving, their pride pricked. But in the whispers outside the homestead, Sarah heard new stories taking shape. She must have charmed him. No, she's planning something. A woman like that? Dangerous. The settlement wanted answers, but Flint gave none. Instead, he sent a single message, asking Sarah to meet him at the creek bend behind the pines. The hour arrived with quiet tension. Sarah walked to the creek with steady breath. Ice skirted the edges of the water, sparkling under the pale sun. Flint stood waiting, hands behind his back, gaze on the horizon. She stopped a few steps from him. "You asked for me." "I did." He took a slow breath. "You walked into that hall alone," he said. "Everyone stared at you with cruelty, and yet you kept your head high. I've seen men crumble under less, but you—" He paused, eyes scanning her face with a quiet intensity. "You are stronger than anyone gives you credit for." Sarah didn't speak. She waited. Flint continued. "I don't believe the stories they tell about you. I don't believe the judgments carved into your name. I want to make you an offer." Quote. Her heartbeat quickened. "I want a wife," he said. "Not for heirs, not for show. I want a companion who walks with dignity. Someone who doesn't pretend, who doesn't claw for position. Someone steady." Sarah swallowed. "Sir, I cannot give you children." "I may never." "I don't want children from you," he said simply. "I want someone who sees the world with quiet truth. Someone who gives respect without selling her soul." The creek murmured in the background, carrying his words like a promise carved in water. Sarah drew a slow breath. "Then what is it you ask of me?" "A marriage of understanding," he said. "You'll have my name and my protection, and in return I ask for honesty and loyalty. Nothing more." Sarah took a step back, searching his eyes. "I can accept," she said softly, "but I won't be silent. I won't be hidden away as someone's shame. If I am to be your wife, I remain myself." Flint nodded once. "Then we understand each other." No touch passed between them. No rushed vows or romantic promises. Only an agreement spoken with the kind of truth that settles deep. By the time she returned to the homestead, snow had begun to fall again. But for the first time in months, its cold didn't pierce as sharply. Because something had changed. Something the settlement wasn't ready for. And something Sarah herself didn't fully understand yet. The next days blurred with preparations. Contracts were drawn. Rules were written. But Sarah refused to sign a clause that restricted her movement. "I won't live like a shadow," she said firmly. Flint didn't argue. Instead, he struck out the entire clause with bold ink. "Respect," he said. "That was our agreement, and I'll honor it." But the settlement refused to honor her. She was denied entry to gatherings. Doors closed when she approached. Women turned away. Servants whispered behind her back. So Sarah walked a different path. She went to St. Michael's Mission, a place forgotten by society. A place where people needed care, not gossip. She carried blankets, medicines, books. She helped the sick, comforted the lonely, taught children their letters. She gave what no one ever gave her, kindness without condition. Soon, the mission children called her the Lady with Gentle Hands. And though Flint never said it aloud, he noticed. He always noticed. But the settlement wasn't done trying to break her. Mrs. Eleanor Worth, the sharpest of the council wives, began spreading stories of conspiracy, accusing Sarah of gaining influence through pity. Rumors grew darker, heavier. But Sarah stayed silent. Flint did not. He walked into the territorial council alone, carrying only one paper in hand. The room fell silent. "Today," he said, voice firm and cold, "I'm here to defend a woman who has given more dignity to this settlement than all your gatherings combined." And with that, the tide began to turn, not just for Sarah, but for the entire territory. Because people were about to see the truth. Sarah Thornton, soon to be Sarah Bridger, was far from the weak woman they thought. She was the calm before a storm that no one saw coming. And Flint Bridger, the mountain man the whole territory admired, had chosen her. Not out of duty, not out of pity, but because something in her matched something in him, something that could not be sold, something that could not be silenced. The Wyoming sky that morning looked softer than usual, as if the clouds themselves paused to watch what the future was about to shape. Life around the settlement moved slowly, but in the heart of the territory something deeper was shifting. Those who once whispered against Sarah now watched her with confused eyes. Some with curiosity, some with fear, some with a respect they did not want to admit. But the truth was simple. Sarah was no longer alone in the shadows. And the mountain man who stood beside her was not a man many dared to cross. After the council meeting, everything felt different. Word spread fast. Everyone heard how Flint Bridger defended Sarah with a strength that shook the pride of councilmen who once believed they controlled everything. They heard how he stripped away Mrs. Eleanor Worth's lies with the ease of a man cutting through brush. And though no formal punishment was written, the social exile that followed for Eleanor was enough to silence even the boldest tongues. That evening, Flint returned home earlier than usual. He walked through the quiet corridors of the homestead with heavy steps, thinking of Sarah, of all she had endured and all she had become. When he entered the east wing, he found her sitting by the window with embroidery resting lightly in her hands. She didn't look up. "You went to the council." "I did." "You defended me." "I did that too." Sarah's hands paused. She turned her face slightly toward him. "Why?" Flint had faced blizzards, bears, and bands of outlaws without ever losing his voice. Yet now words came slowly, as if they had weight he wasn't used to carrying. "Because I can't stand watching you walk through fire alone," he finally said. "Not anymore." Sarah lowered her gaze, the thread between her fingers trembling just a little. Flint knelt before her, not an act of weakness but of truth. His voice softened. "I don't want to keep living in a marriage built on duty," he confessed. "Not when I've seen the heart you carry, not when I've seen how you treat people with nothing but kindness. I don't want a wife by convenience, Sarah. I want a wife by love." Her breath shook. She stared at him, truly stared, as if seeing him fully for the first time. Flint's face held no hesitation, no fear, only honesty. "Love is not simple," she whispered. "Neither are you," he replied. "And I want all of it." Sarah placed her hands gently on his face. "Then don't kneel before me," she murmured. "Walk with me, not ahead, not behind, with me. That is what love looks like to me." Flint rose slowly, meeting her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, soft, warm, and true. No grand promise. No dramatic vow. Just two hearts choosing each other without fear. From that moment on, their home changed. Not with sudden fireworks or loud displays of affection, but with small, quiet gestures that built a life. Flint left her a warm cup of tea every morning. Sarah left a book open to his favorite page each night. They walked through the garden at sunset, their shoulders brushing as if pulled by an invisible thread. Servants began to whisper a different tune. "He looks at her different." Quote, "She smiles now, not like before." They fit. One afternoon, the mission children visited the homestead. Sarah brought them through the garden, showing them wildflowers and teaching them how to press petals in books. Flint watched from the porch, arms crossed, a rare smile softening all his rough edges. Every child greeted him with respect. But they ran to Sarah with trust. And Flint saw it clearer than ever. She was meant to be loved. Not for giving airs, not for carrying a famous name, but for the simple purity of her heart. Spring came with blossoms that covered the settlement like blessings. One morning, a messenger arrived at the Bridger homestead, breathless and eager. He handed Sarah a sealed letter decorated with the territorial emblem. She opened it slowly, her eyes filled, not with sadness, but something golden and warm. It was an official decree, a recognition of her work with widows, orphans, and families forgotten by society, a title never given to any woman in the territory. Keeper of the People's Heart. Flint stood beside her as she read it. "It suits you," he said. Later that day, the settlement hall filled for the ceremony. Flint walked ahead to announce their arrival. But when the doors opened and Sarah stepped inside, all eyes turned. She wore a simple gray wool dress with a blue ribbon trim, nothing extravagant. Yet she shone brighter than anyone in the room, not because of the dress, because of the life she had touched. When officials finished reading the decree, applause filled the hall. This time, it wasn't forced. It wasn't political. It came from miners she had helped, wives she had comforted, children she had taught. After the ceremony, Flint approached her and took her hand. He lifted it gently and pressed a kiss against the back of it. "You deserve every honor," he said quietly. "But more than that," his voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear, "you deserve the whole of my heart." She squeezed his hand. "And you have all of mine." The bells rang across the settlement that evening, echoing over pine ridges and quiet trails. No one had died. No battle had been won. No heir had been born. Yet the bells rang with joy. Because love had found a home. Not the loud, fiery kind people imagined, but the steady, healing kind that grows from pain and patience, from dignity and truth. Months passed. Then years. Sarah and Flint built a life that surprised even them. Children came. 2 of them, a boy and a girl. Not because the territory demanded heirs, but because life had room to bloom again. Their son grew tall and kind. Their daughter carried Sarah's gentle spirit and Flint's fierce eyes. Sarah's legacy grew, not in wealth, not in power, in people. Widows found comfort through her. Children learned their letters in her mission school. Men respected her, not because she was Flint's wife, but because she was Sarah. The woman who had once been sold as if she had no worth at all had become the heart of an entire community. And Flint, the feared and respected mountain man, stood at her side through every season. One spring night, years later, they sat together under the stars. Their children slept inside the homestead. The land was quiet, peaceful. Flint reached for her hand. "You were never barren," he said softly. "You were full of life from the very beginning." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "No one ever cared to see it." "I cared," he whispered, "from the moment you walked into that hall and held your head high." She smiled. "And you chose me." Flint kissed her forehead. "I choose you again, every day, every lifetime." The Wyoming wind carried their quiet laughter into the night, across the pine ridges, over the creek bend where their story began. Because in the end, Sarah's worth was never measured by what she could give, only by who she was. And that was enough to change everything.